Hello and welcome back to Stones That Speak. So I was just now out in my yard burning stuff, as you do on a muggy Florida winter morning / afternoon when you've had the day off, and listening to podcasts in one ear with my kids whining in the other. And I was listening to a new conversation that just dropped with Jordan Peterson, where he's talking to these two Catholic dudes. And they get to this part where they're talking about what exists if there's no one to look at it. And it was so cool to me, because it rode right along the tracks of thought that I've been taking recently, and I was like, I'm not stupid. I mean, if I'm stupid with somebody else, at least I'm not all by myself stupid. So I want to play for you the relevant part of this conversation and try to help you see what I'm seeing, and also maybe help to articulate what I think Jordan Peterson was trying to say. So let's dig in. Jordan Peterson talks to two Catholic dudes about the nature of reality and what happens when everybody's gone. All right, so here we are. They've been talking around this idea, and at some point, Jordan Peterson kind of dropped this idea, right? That reality doesn't exist without consciousness. Let's just watch and see how this goes, and how this conversation goes, and we'll talk about it for a second.
I wanted to circle back to, you said, if I heard you correctly, that reality doesn't exist without consciousness. And I think that's true if God exists. But then if God doesn't exist, then it's not true. So human beings, of course, haven't been on planet Earth since the beginning of the universe. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old. So say 12 billion years ago, there were no human beings at all. And presumably there was no consciousness at all. So there was reality. There were the beginning of stars and things like that, but there was no conscious beings anywhere that was able to understand that.
Let's think about what this guy just said. There was reality. There were stars. What's a star? I mean, really think about, what is it? Because I know what it is, and the way I know what it is that I look up into the sky, and I can see them with my eyes, and I can comprehend them with my mind, and so I create a category for a point of light that exists in the night sky that I can see with my eyes and comprehend with my mind, and I give it certain properties. It is the light that exists where there is not darkness, right? It is maybe potentially a light that exists in a pattern with other stars and makes a constellation. Okay, let's start there. Yes. Okay. Catholic man thinks that there were stars, that there can be stars without any conscious entity to perceive them. Can there be constellations without any conscious entity to perceive constellations? See? Do you see what the problem is? I hope you can see. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to make this. Okay, so this is all sort of building off of the video we made several weeks ago about the graspable nature of reality. That things can't exist for you outside of your ability to interact with them in some sense. Okay? I have this cassette tape. The green screen filter doesn't like it. How about this? Does it? Yeah, okay. I have this cassette tape player. Why do I have a cassette tape player? Because I have this cassette tape that I'm not going to show you because the green screen hates it. So, looks like somebody left the fast forward on. That was probably one of my little munchkins. This cassette tape player, I can hold it in my hands. I can push play, and if there are batteries in it, it will play a cassette. Okay? I can push fast forward, and it will move the cassette in such a way that it is further along in the story or song or whatever I'm listening to. I can interact with it. It exists for me because I can do all these things with it. Alright? If there was no one around for the cassette player to exist for, if there was no one around for the star to exist for, what does it mean to say that it exists? In what way does it exist? Let's let them talk for a little bit longer, and maybe we can dig into this better in a way that's not stupid. Because I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I want to communicate it well, and this conversation seemed like a great way to get started with that. So let's let them talk for a little bit.
Unless God exists. Now, if God exists, and if it's true that God is the Logos, well, then you would say from all eternity, there was consciousness, there was a mind, there was a divine mind. And so, and on that view, there actually would be an ultimate unity, you might say, in terms of the divine essence and the divine mind ultimately being one. So consciousness and existence have this fundamental ground in God. But if God doesn't exist, then I think what you said would not be true because, again, 12 billion years ago, there's no human beings around. Presumably, unless there are aliens, there's no one around to be conscious. And so there would have been reality, say 12 billion years ago, but there wouldn't have been consciousness.
Yes.
Yes, but. He's about to say yes, but. Because. What is reality? What do you mean when you say reality, that there was reality? So, in the previous video where we touched on this topic, right, when I was trying to form this idea, we talked about colors, right? We said that colors don't exist without the ability of the eye to interact with the photon, right? The photon whizzing around on its own is not a color. Does that track? You could argue from a certain point of view that it has like a certain frequency of electromagnetic waves, that it could interact with objects. So with the we're not going to spread out the argument too far yet, but the color doesn't exist without an eye to see it. All right? Before, let's just take a completely, take God out of the universe and assume evolution and 13 billion years and all that stuff. Before eyes evolved, there was no color in the world. Now, we can still conceivably ask something like, what color was the dirt that, let's say, an amoeba that could not see was living in? We can with our current eyes project back the idea of color onto the reality based on how we understand the world at present, and not be completely misguided, but the color wasn't in the dirt until there was someone to perceive it in some way, either literally directly with the eye or with the mind's eye, through the idea of casting back into the past and creating something that you could then think about as having had a color, as someone who has experienced and grasped colors. Let's let Jordan talk for a little bit, and I'll continue this idea.
So I want to go out on a limb here too.
You're
because
going way far out on a
I
limb,
have
Jordan. I'm there with you.
that. I can't.
This is a good tree.
The supposition that our scientific cosmological theories have an implicit conscious observer nested inside of them, even when they claim not to. So, for example, when you talk about 13 billion years ago, there's I don't know how to say this properly.
Let me try. Okay. Time. Right? We were cool with the color thing, right? We were cool with the colors only existing if eyes can see them. Otherwise, we just have electromagnetic waves. Electromagnetic waves, again, we're going to go further, and you're probably going to hate me and say that's stupid. But electromagnetic waves, okay, so we're going to say they exist, but they don't produce something that you can call color unless they have an eye to interact with. Now, time is also an object of experience. To say that something happened before there was anything to experience time, to say that there was time passing before anything could experience the time, is like saying that there were colors before there was how am I trying to say this? Before there was an eye. Okay? Now, we have in a sense extracted out time from our experience into a mechanical thing in the similar way that we have extracted out the photon from the color, or the electromagnetic wave from the color, and we think, aha, we've solved the problem. We've gotten ourselves out of this mess because we've got this sort of mechanical time that we can run backwards before there was anybody to experience the time, because we took it apart, right? We opened up the inside of how things work, and we saw it, and we we can extract back. But understand, you're doing the same trick with the time as you were doing with the color. When you ask, what color was the dirt on the earth before there was anybody to see the dirt, it wasn't any color. Except in the imagination that you can cast into the world that you have created of the past, out of the things that are present now. There is this is going to be a whole other sidebar, which will probably get me in trouble, that there's not really existing anywhere a past. You can't go back to it. You can't hold it in your hand. You can look at the collection of things that exist now. You can work from the collection of memories that you have in your head now. And you can create a world that you call the past. And we all have this world created. And I'm not... The past isn't accessible to us as an object. It is only accessible to us as a construct of our minds. That's okay. That's really okay. Okay? In the same way that the future does not exist yet. It is only accessible as a construct of your mind. You will say, tomorrow I will get up. I will go to work. I will eat breakfast. I will drive my car. I will do all these things. The future, and there is a certain amount of definitude about the future. The sun almost definitely going to rise. Okay? Your car is very likely to start. It has the many, many hundreds of times you've started in the past. Your car will probably start. So there's the elements of the future that are pretty certain, and there's elements of the future that are like, man, I don't know. Like, what if you get in a car wreck? Like, you can't really predict how that's going to go. What if there's, like, rain or not rain? You can't really, there's too much chaos going forward. You get the same thing going backwards. You think that because it already happened, somehow it's solved? But it's not. You have the same chaos and the same, like, we have reasonable certainty that this happened, but then we're not sure about this, and, like, it's all the same. The forwards and backwards, you're losing fidelity the further out you go, and the further away from sort of your common experience you go. All that stuff loses resolution at a certain point. Okay, so 13 billion years, what does that mean? If I said to my kids, the universe was created 13 billion years ago, they would say, wow, that's a long time ago. And they would have a feeling of what it means for it to be a long time ago. And if there was not anybody around to have that feeling, I'm shaking the desk and the camera, and I'm sorry, I'm very excited. If there wasn't anybody around to have that feeling, it couldn't be a long time ago. If there was nobody to observe a sun going around the Earth and the stars rotating through the skies and figuring out that the seasons changed in a certain way, all those things, there wouldn't be years. Okay? So what would I know you think like you're gonna get out of this somehow. Like, okay, so we're gonna invent some other unit of time that doesn't involve observation. I'm waiting for you to invent a unit of time that doesn't involve something that you can look at and measure. You can't do it. I'm hyped up.
The concept of 13 billion years seems to me to require a conscious observer to formulate to begin with, because I don't understand
I'm looking in the wrong direction.
What duration consists of in the absence of something experiencing duration. It's like, how does something last 13 billion years? Like, in some sense, it all happens at once if there's no conscious observer. Like, there's...
Well, it would depend. It would depend.
This guy's about to completely miss the point. I'm here for it. Let's watch him completely miss the point.
Right on the nature of time. So the view you're talking about was actually put forward by a guy named Berkeley, and he said, "To be is to be perceived." So,
and I should admit I don't know Berkeley that well, or maybe at all. I've read a little bit about a lot of philosophy and science. So forgive me if I don't make an intelligent comment about this guy.
In other words, if you don't have a perceiver, there just wouldn't be any being at all. But I don't think that's right. I mean, I think you're right that the idea or the concept, the human concept of time, obviously that can't exist without human beings. But
what are you going to say? What concept of time? How can there even be a concept without a conceiver?
Before there were any human beings, it seems that all available scientific evidence suggests that there were things. There was carbon molecules, and there were stars, and there was all kinds of things.
Carbon molecules? Did they go to lunch together? Were they like hanging out at the carbon molecule bar saying, boy, it sure is great to be a carbon molecule. I hope I don't lose a nucleus and become a different kind of molecule. Or a carbon, lose one of my carbon atoms to become a different carbon molecule. I'll be shorter. Bob, the carbon molecule, wouldn't that be tragic if I lost one of my carbon atoms? Be how? What do you mean there would be carbon molecules? I'll let Jordan get back to here, because he's going to say something important here.
That existed before there was any conscious human perceiving them. So it is true, of course, that all of our evidence for the Big Bang and all of our scientific investigations presuppose conscious observers that are, taking the measurements and things like that. But I'm not sure it follows from that logically that therefore we can't, with good reason, hold that things existed before there are any human or for that matter, any kind of conscious observers. unless we think Berkeley's right, that to be is to be perceived.
Well,
but I think that's dubitable.
I'm going to disagree with him in a second, but let's let Jordan talk for a minute.
There's something in Berkeley's objection that seems to me to be hard to skate around. Like, when we imagine time before consciousness and we imagine the existence of objects before consciousness, we imagine them as if a conscious observer was there, even though there wasn't one. So we think, like, we see a star from a particular level of resolution. Right?
Preach.
We can't see subatomic particles. We can't see atomic structures. We can't see molecular structures. That which exists before there's a perceiver is all those levels simultaneously at once, with a duration that doesn't, with a temporal sequence that doesn't involve duration. And so whatever was there before there was a perceiver is in some sense unimaginable without the projection of a perceiver back into time.
It's impossible to imagine things that you can't imagine. This is self-evidently true, guys. I don't know how else to say it. It's just how it is.
And I think that warps our perspective on what it was that's there, and perhaps our perspective on the role of consciousness in the genesis of being. So
I love the look on this guy's face. He's like, what? Wait.
Here's another way of thinking about it, and I don't know what your view would be. So let's say, God forbid, there's some sort of plague that strikes humanity and all human beings die. On my view, there would still be lots of things that continue to exist. Like the sun would still exist, the earth would still exist, there'd be all kinds of things that exist. Now, there'd be no human beings in that terrible scenario that were there to perceive it, but they would still continue to exist. Or maybe you have a different view.
I have a different view!
So imagine that consciousness was eradicated, say, not just human beings, just to make it cleaner in some sense.
This is a good,
I can't
good addition.
understand how to conceptualize what it is that would be left. You know, is it nothing but quantum potential? Is it a sea of quantum potential?
The sea of quantum potential. If you want to talk about what's really there without observer, all right, if we got rid of the observer and that's all there is, that's all you can reasonably posit. And even that has its problems. But at least there you're talking about, like, that's as far down as we can go. Because the tree doesn't have a boundary. The river doesn't have a final definition. It is a thing that exists in our experience through time, through space, that, like, we carve it out of the world and say, here is a river, here is a tree, there is a star, there is a sun. But on a material level, those things, from the perspective of how they're talking about it, those things don't have existence in and of themselves. There has to be experience of them. There has to be division. All right? To say, this thing right here is different than this thing right here. Now, remember I held this up earlier? Remember this? All right? I haven't fiddled with it at all. This was in there. Okay? It's Suspense, Volume 2. On one side is the Kettler method, on the other side, the Big Shot. Neither one of these is particularly good, but the Kettler method is a better episode of Suspense. Are these two objects? Or one object? Or many, many objects? I mean, there's screws here that I'm going to pull out. Here's this battery cover. That could be separated. There's batteries in here. I've dropped the batteries on the floor. How many objects is this? Because we were all pretty cool with this being one object. And, I mean, let's be real also. If you're watching this, you're watching it on video. So, there actually aren't any objects at all. From a material point of view, you're just watching pixels recreate things. Why were you cool with that being one object? Because you are a person who was with me, right? Fine, like, constructing this as having being of its own independent nature. But it doesn't have that without the benefit of some consciousness. You don't actually... Now, I'm fine with the arguments for God. I believe in God. That's cool. I'm glad these guys are trying to argue for God. But... this exists because we see it as existing. Because we pick it out of the world... and we paint a line around it with our minds and say, this is a thing that is separate from other things. We don't, like, the fact that there's oxygen inside of this thing, and there's holes, and there's oxygen outside of this thing, does not confuse us in the slightest. We don't look at this and say, but wait a minute, is this part of the atmosphere? Because it has oxygen in it. And if I move this around, I'm moving oxygen, and there's oxygen in the atmosphere, so am I moving the atmosphere? Or is this separate from the... How is this separate from the atmosphere? Wait, is this part of my hand? It's touching my hand. I can obviously separate it from my hand, but I can separate my fingernail from my hand if I pull hard enough. What if I glue it to my hand? Is it part of my hand then? We would probably say no. Why? It's not easy to remove from my hand at that point. Because things exist because you draw a line around them with your mind and say, this is a thing. Right? This is... I'm not going to open up the Peugeot creation Genesis commentary. I probably should, but I'm not going to. But this is his whole point. That what the Genesis account is saying, by his estimation, is that God took things and set them apart and gave them names, right? Gave them identity, and then they existed. Before he set them apart and gave them names and gave them identities, they did not exist, because that's not possible. Existence is something, being itself, like is what our sense of being grasps, in the same way that color is what our eyes grasp with our minds and with everything else, right? In the same way that is something that we are creating along with the physical world, so is being. We think that, like, there is possibility of being beyond our conception, but there's not. There's things beyond being, right? In the sense, like, God is beyond our grasp. And that's why I've just recently sort of understood this. You know, you read about all these apophatics trying to understand God, and they can't talk about God, and they're saying, like, this is beyond all being, beyond all understanding, beyond, right? In some sense, the God, the infinite God of the universe is not graspable by us. So, like, we can't, like, putting him in the, like, we can't even put him in the box of being because he's so big. Like, we can't, there's a sense in which we can't truly say anything about God because he's beyond grasping. But everything that is real to us and is within our realm of understanding being is graspable in this sense that is required by consciousness. Let me let him talk for a little longer, and it's possible I'm just blowing hot air at this point, but it just... fireworks went off with this page. I just want to reiterate my basic idea here. Being is a graspable quality. Things can't be without something to be them. In the same way that color, I don't understand how to make that a verb, right? But colors can't exist without something to see them. Being can't exist without something to grasp being. Being can't be. Language fails.
Is it not turned into stars and solar systems and galaxies when there's an observer specifying a level of analysis? It isn't obvious to me from looking at the physics what it is that's there. See, because you say, well, there'd still be a sun. It's like, well, wait a second. When you think of the sun, you think of what you perceive. And when you say it would still be there, you think that what you perceive would still be there, but you're not there. So what you perceive would not be there. I don't know what it is that would be there. You could say it's as if the sun is still there, but the level of analysis problem and the fact of the strange constituent reality of matter at the quantum level makes it very difficult for me to conceive of a universe that's just the same as it is now, except there's no conscious observer.
And I've been reading Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth by D.E. Harding, so I want to add in something, because he talked about, like, zoom level, essentially, right? How close you are, right? Oh, the sun would still exist. Would it? Because, let's say you're let's hypothesize that you build a craft that can land on the sun. Well, now, for the person on the sun, the sun, it doesn't exist, right? You've zoomed so close in that, like, there's this little patch of sun, but everything else is, like, way too big for you to see. Okay, now all of a sudden there's, like, individual bursts of hydrogen, explosions that exist. And you zoom way further down, and all of a sudden, okay, now the hydrogen atoms exist, because you're zoomed farther into them, and they exist. And you zoom way out, and you say, oh, a galaxy exists. I took all of these stars that exist, and I collected them together into one thing that's a galaxy. And I separated it. Wait, no, I didn't do that. Did the galaxy exist? Right? That's, again, back to the constellation problem. You think like, oh, well, the sun, it's an object. Get out of town! The sun is not an object any more than a galaxy is an object, or I am an object, alright? You can look close enough at me to see a collection of organs, and look closer still, and you will see a billion different little cells, and if you zoom far enough out, I just turn into like a little blue dot somewhere way out and far. Alright, again, I'm ripping off D.E. Harding completely with Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth here. Definitely worth a read. I've got the unabridged version on Audible. Legit book. But again, you can't get away from the conscious perception of what all this is. That's something I wanted to try to say. Jordan Peterson also is trying to say it. I wanted to, like, give him a hand. I wanted to, like, give him a leg up and be like, I'm here with you, buddy. I get it. I understand what you're trying to say. These two Catholic dudes, God bless them. They're not tracking. They think the object somehow, that this somehow is a tape player in and of itself, and not in relation to me being a person who wants to play tapes. That's it. That's all I've got for today. I gotta go fry some chicken. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.